Thank you for joining us this afternoon, where we will hear from female board members on what barriers and trends they are seeing with women in the boardroom, and what actions boards and company leadership should take to create board diversity. Research has shown time and time again that companies with diverse boards and leadership teams perform better than their less diverse peers. We all realize and appreciate that diversity falls beyond gender, but that is a focus for another discussion. I would like to introduce all of our panelists. So to my immediate right is Cheryl Packwood, who is an independent non-executive director of Carlyle Group and a member of its Risk Oversight Committee. She is a former chief executive officer and deputy chairman for Business Bermuda, former general manager of Digicel Bermuda, former director of legal services and enforcement of international affairs for the Bermuda Monetary Authority, and a former overseas representative to the United States for the government of Bermuda. Having over 20 years of global experience in legal, marketing, negotiations, and risk and crisis management through social and political turmoil, Cheryl sits as a member of various other boards and organizations in Bermuda and overseas. Then beside Cheryl is Sara Schroter, I'm sorry, and I should know better than this, who is managing director of corporate at Meritus Trust, as well as its general counsel. She utilizes her wide range of legal experience in the private client, banking, insurance, regulatory, corporate, governance, commercial, and litigation areas. Before joining Meritus, Sara was general counsel and a member of the executive team at Bermuda Commercial Bank. She was also in-house counsel with AXA UK PLC. Sara is passionate about promoting women's leadership and diversity and inclusion through her work, including her time as past co-chair and current committee member of the Institute of Directors branch in Bermuda. Then my name is Rachel Frisby. Next month, I will have lived in Bermuda for over 20 years and have been working with Deloitte since graduating from university. The majority of my work is acting as an officer of the court in the capacity of a liquidator in both Bermuda and BVI domiciled entities. I am a member of Deloitte's Global Turnaround and Restructuring Executive Committee and leads its Diversity and Inclusion Program. I serve on the boards of Bermuda's Restructuring and Insolvency Specialist Association and the Bermuda School of Music. I'm also a member of a number of technical subcommittees. Now note that all views of the panelists are our own and not those of our employers, because we will be getting into some sticky topics. First, we wanted to start this afternoon understanding what experience you, the audience, have with boards. We have 3 polling questions, of which we will have to combine the votes for both the virtual and live audience. So the first question is, are you currently sitting on at least one board? If you are, can you raise your hands in the room? 2, 3, 4. I don't know if...
Virtually, we have 28% yes and 72% no.
So 28, and we've got 4 out of 50. So that gets us to under 30%.
Not even.
What
we're
did you
lawyers.
say? What was the first number?
Listen.
What was the first number to say? I'm sorry. 27.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, definitely under 30%. Okay. And then for the second question is, do you in a personal or professional capacity know any women currently sitting on a board? And those 4 people should have still put their hands up. Okay, well that is the majority in this room, which is great.
Still coming in. Okay, online we have 65%, I'm lying, 77% yes and 23% no.
Okay, so that's actually pretty good. Now, the next question ends up being a little bit different in terms of, in a personal or professional capacity, do you know of any boards that have more than one women director? 4.
Paying boards or non-paying boards?
Doesn't matter. Okay, so we're about half of the room here.
48% yes online and 50-50 online.
Okay.
Oh,
So we are right bang in the middle. Okay, well, we'll talk about those a little bit more. So you may already be familiar with some of these statistics. Research suggests that companies with greater gender and ethnic board diversity have stronger financial performance. Credit Suisse reported that companies with women in a third of leadership saw average returns increase to more than 25%. There are also fewer instances of bribery, corruption, and fraud, as more diversity of thought leads to better problem solving and outcomes. If this is the case, then why are we still struggling to address this issue? A McKinsey Women Matter report shows that although 72% of responding executives agree that there is a link between gender balance and business success. Just 29% see achieving that balance as a top priority. Now, to kick things off, I want to go through some statistics obtained from a March 2021 Deloitte study titled Women in the Boardroom, Progress at a Snail's Pace. I'll just wait for that to pop up. Perfect, thank you. Based on a data set covering over 10,000 companies in 51 countries and 176,000 directorships, 19.7% of board seats globally are held by women, an increase of just 2.8 percentage points since the last report published in 2019. If this rate of change were to continue every 2 years, we could expect to reach something near parity in 2045, which is actually close to my retirement age. There's been a slight acceleration in the pace of change from our last report with a reduction of 7 years. So we're doing better than what we thought 2 years ago, but still quite a bit away. However, the presence of more women does not mean that they are reaching top leadership positions. There are still a comparatively low percentage of women board chairs at 6.7%. And in the C-suite, 5% of CEOs and 15.7% of CFOs are women. Now, if we go to the next slide, we have found that the most diverse boards tend to be at companies led by women at the executive or board levels, which actually makes sense. For example, companies with women CEOs have, on average, significantly more gender-balanced boards than those led by men, 33.5% women compared to 19.4%. Also, board committees with women chairs tend to have more women members. If you can go to the next slide. A joint study of US public company filings up to June 2021 of women and minorities on Fortune 500 boards by Deloitte and Alliance for Board Diversity reported that 40% of the Fortune 500 companies had 40% or more diversity. However, 1.2%, that's 6 of them, of the companies remain composed entirely of white male board members. The progress made on overall diversity has largely been due to the increase of white women on boards, an increase of 21% of seats since 2010. And although not relevant to this discussion, I thought it was also interesting that minority men showed no substantive increase in their rate of representation in the Fortune 500, and that African American black men have actually lost seats. So there were 6 lost seats over that period. Now, on the next slide, it was noted that there were 974 new board seats as compared to the study that was completed 2 years prior. Of these, 81% were filled by white directors, of which 27.2% were women. So I know there's been a lot of numbers that I've been bringing out, and they all tend to be a little bit bleak. And so having said all that, I'm going to then move over to the panelists. So Cheryl, Sara, what are your thoughts on progress or lack thereof being made in both Bermuda and elsewhere?
Gosh,
Whoever
how do we
wants to start.
follow that? That was pretty depressing. Wow.
How
How are we going to make it more
ask
positive?
the question again.
What are your thoughts on progress or lack thereof being made in both Bermuda and elsewhere? And just so you guys know, that I have asked them to be as realistic as we can about this discussion. It might not necessarily be what you may all want to hear, but if this is what it is, we need to put it out there, and that's the only way that we're going to actually be able to make any change.
So maybe we'll start with the progress, and then we'll quickly switch to what we can do to make it better. And then we
Well,
won't.
in between, we can give some reality check,
Yeah, okay.
because it's not all rosy.
It's not all rosy. She said realistic. Okay.
Okay.
Would you like to go first?
I am disheartened by any progress. I see progress in countries where there has been a significant attempt to force boards to move towards gender inclusion, and I'm talking about France is at the top of the list. I was fascinated. I was also very interested. Morocco keeps surprising me these days. I've been looking up things on Morocco, and they're doing actually pretty well. They're on a 3-year progress towards more inclusion on boards with women. But France has a requirement of 40%. And what I was looking through all these, and when I was looking at the different countries and numbers, it's not 100% across the board. But whether they had 20% requirement for companies to have women on boards, or 30%, or in the case of France, 40%, more often than not, in those countries, they had more than the 40% or more than the 30%. So France, I think, had, if I recall correctly, it was 43% or 45% of women in board positions, whereas the legal requirement was 40%. And so another, Germany had excellent numbers as well. That was what impressed me, whereas countries that made no effort, countries that didn't even have policy considerations or by regulators or statements out of some sort of regulatory body, their numbers were abysmally low, such as Bermuda, which is under 20%. And I know we're not, this is really just about gender, but if you look at black women today are the highest, as a demographic, highest educated, we were just talking about this before, highest educated group demographic in the population. And yet they make the least amount of money, they are least likely to be on a board, they are least likely to be in the C-suite, and that is across the board, whether you're talking about Bermuda or the United States, and that is a very telling statement in terms of progress to be made, because progress to be made I think has to be forced. And I don't think France has done enough. It should be 50%. We are more than 50% of the population. Why aren't we 50% of boards? Why aren't we 50% of CEOs? I mean, I think in Bermuda we're 54% of the population, so quite frankly we should be 54% of the CEOs. We're better educated. I remember, so I get my first big paying board, and I figure, oh, I can parlay this into another board position, right? So I talked to my friendly guy, another board member, and he says, okay, I'll go talk to some people. He literally came back to me and he said, Cheryl, the boardroom is the last bastion for men in power, and they're not interested in having women on boards. And I hadn't even raised the issue of I'm a woman and da-da-da, but and that keeps coming back in stereo. And it's not just, it's the last bastion of male power or male hegemony. It is the last bastion of white male hegemony. And until we can change that mindset, and I would say that mindset worldwide. Now maybe in places like Asia and Africa it's not white male hegemony, but it's certainly male hegemony. But in the Western world, Europe, North America, Bermuda, the Caribbean, it is white male hegemony. I'm sorry.
So,
put a positive spin on that.
Okay. I'll talk a bit about the Institute of Directors. So the Institute of Directors is an international corporate governance body that was founded in London. There are 17,000 members around the world. And in Bermuda, we have a local branch here that we've had for the last 10 years, and we have about 184 members. So around about 1% of the total population. So interestingly, for the first time ever last year, the Institute of Directors ran a global D&I survey. What was interesting about that is the results came back and about 7% of people answered. So not really statistically reliable, but the results were about 20% of those respondents were female. Now in Bermuda, about 47 to 49% of our members on average are female. So very close to the demographic of the population that we were talking about. What is also interesting is that 62% of the respondents globally were over 64 years old. Whereas the new joiners that they're now starting to see come through the IOD, the average age is about 48. So they're doing something right in that they're increasing attraction to younger business people and entrepreneurs and directors, but they just can't get the statistic of females up internationally. So I think we're doing pretty well in Bermuda. So last night, because I thought you'd ask this question about how are we doing in Bermuda, I set myself the target. I said, I'm going to look at local boards in Bermuda, and when I find a board where the gender split is 50%, I'm going to stop looking and I'm going to go to bed. So it was about 12:15 in the morning, and my husband was like, okay, can you come to bed now? And I said to Rachel, how comfortable do you feel with me reading off kind of some of my findings as a lying there? She was like, no, be real. So in no particular order, and I apologize to any of those people in the room who might work for these companies, but here we go. Markel, 3 of 12 are female on their board. Chubb, 4 of 12. Renry, 3 of 11. Fidelis, 1 of 11. Bacardi, 2 of 13. Argus, 3 of 11. BF&M, 2 of 9. Butterfield Bank, 3 of 9. Markel and Chubb, Chubb, 33%. Butterfield, 33%. Everybody less than that. I was like, what do? I need to go to bed. How do I keep going? I looked at my own board because I was like, okay, I might be cheating. 4 of 5 of my board are female. 9 of 10, 8 of 10 of our executive leadership are female. I was like, okay, I can go to bed. But I was just like still surprised by that number. Like, because we see so many influential, very senior female business leaders in the room, on the streets, in panels, at all of the organizations that speak to women in leadership. So women in reinsurance, 100 women in finance, board lists, like all over the world. Women are getting in the rooms and talking about these issues and working together on these issues. But we are not the people that are meant to be in the room because we are not the problem.
Look at this room.
And can I just interject really quickly and say
I'm
that
sorry.
I did try and invite some male executives to be on today's panel, and as you can see, none of them accepted.
Maybe they were scared of us.
I think they were.
So progress in some places, but possibly not as fast as some of those other countries. And I'm sure we'll talk about quotas and what other countries are doing to move along quicker.
Are you able to poll a question you didn't ask for? How many in the virtual audience are men?
I
Women?
didn't ask that question. And I don't know whether or not we can get a response to that, Deshay. And so for those who are joining us virtually, out of, how many are here? About 50 of us or so, that we've got one man. Thank you very much for attending. But that does tend to be sort of pretty normal when we attend these types of events, right? You're not getting the decision makers and those who are really in leadership and being proactive about change to actually come to it. So it's almost like, then what's the next best thing that you can do? It's like you can stamp your foot and you can kind of try and push your own doors. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. But yes, in terms of frustration, I think you can sense, especially for the three of us here, that it is still something that has to be figured out. It's not quite there yet. So when we talk about holdups to progression, we've already talked about kind of senior leadership and everything else. What needs to be done?
Maybe we could talk about the reasons for the holdup, and then we could identify how do we fix some of those issues.
What are the reasons?
I think I have 5, and then tell me how you feel about this. I'd say my number 1 is modern society and civilization is set up for women to be the lesser sex. In religion, in education, in business, in cultural norms. And therefore, you're dealing with a deep-rooted issue that requires commitment to change. I'd say it's probably kind of top up there. Cultural. I'd say you've got women who are leaving the workplace faster than before, particularly after COVID. So I think the Deloitte Women in Work study showed that 46% of women that they surveyed out of 5,000 say that they are burnt out. More than 50% said that they feel more stressed this year than they did last year. Why is that? I surmise it's because women carry the mental load. Do you know that term, the mental load? Yeah? So not only are we working and trying to excel in our careers, we are loving daughters and wives, and then we carry the mental load at home. So who is it that remembers? I'm sorry, I'm going to stereotype for a second, and you can shake your head if you disagree, but let's just stereotype generally. Who remembers your kid's dentist appointment? Who knows what to pack in the lunchbox because your kid likes this snack and your other kid likes this snack? Or who knows when football is and that you have to pack a spare change of clothes and an extra water bottle on a Wednesday afternoon? I mean, let's be real about it. And it's all of this stuff that you never capture on a list anywhere. Like nobody says, you know, today you're going to remember this and I'm going to remember that. It's like sitting in your head all the time, along with all the things you got to do at work and all the things you got to do in the rest of your life. And you're like carrying this weight. So no wonder women feel a little bit stressed and are starting to think, what is really important to me? And particularly when you hit your 40s and you're more financially secure, and in Bermuda, we generally have pretty good salaries at the professional level. So by kind of 45, you could be pretty financially secure and being saying to yourself, gosh, what do I want for my life? Like, do I want to be doing this my whole life? Or do I want to spend more time with my family? Or do I want to become a consultant? Or do I want to become a director? Or, these whole host of things. So you're dealing with this mental health issue. Plus, or you've got these women who are much more confident and secure in their own financial position who are maybe saying, you know what, I'm going to step back a little bit and do something else. So I think that is another issue. There's also this concept of quiet quitting, which you may also have heard of, which is, I'm going to stay in my job.
The Great Resignation.
The Great Resignation, but not even resigning. I'm just going to stay, but I'm just going to do the minimum just to get by because I want to spend my time over here. So I'm not going to quit until I'm ready to quit. And so perhaps that's a reason that you're not seeing women push for the C-suite positions because they're not engaged, feeling like that's the road for them, potentially, is what I'm hearing. I think, so we've got culture, we've got this issue about how do women get to that role, and do they even want to get to that role? And then I'd say, why change the status quo? So if there's no reason, there's no push on me, there's no stick to make me make these changes, and I'm happy sitting in my current board roles, and my friends are happy sitting in their current board roles, and we're making a nice little bit of money for our retirement, what would be the reason to force the change? Or maybe there's just a lack of consciousness. Maybe I don't know how to make the change. Yes, I want more women on my board, but how do I do that? I just don't think there's the talent in Bermuda. Or what is it I really need to do to make that happen? And so maybe there's this issue of complacency. I'm happy with
Complacency on the part of men?
Yeah.
In the boardroom?
Yeah.
The decision makers?
Yeah, I'm happy with how it is. Or I know I need to make a change, so I'm going to make a token change. I'm going to appoint one woman, and even better, one black woman, and then I'm done. Because, I've kind of met my statistic, and everyone will leave me alone for a little while. And I'm really just generalizing and playing devil's advocate. So for all those people who are like, wow, she's being kind of ballsy, I'm just putting it out there, and
I
we can
think
disagree.
they have fun together.
On the golf course, or in the boardroom.
In the boardroom.
Or
I was in a board meeting a little bit ago, and they had gone into the boardroom, but we could do it online or offline. I was the only board member not in the boardroom, and so it was all men. And it was horrific. Because they were so, I guess they were all happy to be together again. They were laughing, talking all over each other. I couldn't hear anything. The board meeting it usually would end during all of the pandemic. We were very efficient and effective because you couldn't talk over each other. And they finished, it took them like 8-10 hours versus 4. Just like there's a culture of women, there's also a culture of men. And as I said when I first was giving my grievances, they enjoy being together, and we change that dynamic in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And so unless they are forced to make a change, that change isn't going to happen. They have learned that they like having us around. We are now in universities with them. We go to elementary school, high school, college, law school, medical school with them. And we're
Or more than them.
And we're even more than them in many cases, because women are looking towards being the most educated group on the planet. But they seem to like being by themselves in the boardroom, I would say.
You'll invite us back again, right? We're not like shooting ourselves in the foot. No man is ever going to invite us to sit on a panel again. Right?
Well, don't worry, they're not even out there in virtual land.
So I do want to just really quickly mention something that you had brought up in terms of multitasking, primarily being sort of the woman's kind of, job between sort of the family. And one of the things that I think that we need to consider is that because we're so used to that how we communicate with others, especially leadership, are we doing it effectively? So I think a lot of us, rather than meeting somebody in person, necessarily it's that if I can be on the phone, if I could be kind of like typing stuff up, I can send a really quick email, it'll be done and dusted, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't have to worry about it and then wait until response would come in. But what leadership wants is to have you sort of present, to be able to kind of say, oh, I've got these ideas and yes, this is kind of like really strategic, et cetera, and let's talk about this, but we're not doing it ourselves. So I think in terms of sort of action points, we'll get into this later, but just with that in particular is, take a little bit of time to actually have some face-to-face discussions with your management team. They can see that you're out there, you're thinking about kind of what is going to happen next. You're thinking about kind of what can we do to make things a little bit different, and really knowing it's coming from you. And that if they want to have a debate about it, that you can come up with answers, or it's a very thoughtful response rather than, I think I'll wait 10 minutes, kind of formulate what I think, and then put it back out there. And maybe they're like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. But, if I had got this, 5 minutes ago, we could have just done it really, really quickly. It would also not take on as much of my time. So that was just something I wanted to add. So then having said that, in terms of kind of fixing all of this.
Can I just, the whole progress issue, and progress is in fits and starts. We go forward, we go backwards. And my concern, your statistic that we won't hit parity until 2045, I'm concerned that that may not even happen then. And that's because if you look at the world today, we're in a place where we look like we're going backwards, especially where you see the populist right-wing movements that are coming up across the world. I always feel like we have to look at all of this stuff holistic, or with a Gestalt perspective, because there's a congressman in. I looked him up. I was talking to the other. I think I was talking to you the other day about him, John Gibbs, and he's running out of Western Michigan for Congress on the Republican ticket. He got the Republican nomination, and he has espoused that women's suffrage has actually been bad for the United States. It's created a bigger government. Big government is bad, so women's suffrage is bad. Women in the workplace is bad because men can't make what he said, lighthearted sexual jokes, or they have to be so scared that they're going to be sued for sexual harassment, and so women have retarded growth. So I would say that 10 years ago, no one would have dared say something like that. They may have thought it, but they would never say it. We have, Sweden, of all countries in the world, just voted in a right-wing populist government. Sweden is considered the bastion of progressive movements and, almost of socialist society, et cetera. Italy just voted in their Nazi right-wing party. And as we see America going down a populist right-wing pathway. With all of what's happening today in the world, do we really think we're going to get parity in 2045?
What do you think? On the fence? Who's like, yes, we are going to hit this in Bermuda? Anybody?
Or France, maybe. Let's go for France. We like France.
Well, so one of the studies for the this Niels Pace report. It does have a section about Bermuda, and it's taken information from sort of public information as well as at the time that the Directors Register was still available to the public, so able to download that. And they did say that females on boards in Bermuda were pretty much on par in terms of percentages, so about 20%, just slightly under
20%.
just slightly. It was 19.1 actually for Bermuda, and 19.7% globally, but that we are actually aligned. So if we are thinking 2045 and it seems to be on par, then maybe so, just looking at it the other way.
Potentially. Did you know that in 2018 in the study, 6% of CEOs in Bermuda were female, and in 2021, 5% of CEOs in Bermuda are female?
Yep.
Some way to go on that statistic. And we haven't even thrown race in there, but
A little bit.
a little bit. I think there's lots we can do.
And again,
depends
5%
how brave.
is also consistent with global.
Yeah.
So we're not as bad as we might think. So just looking at it from the other side, a little bit of positivity.
Yes.
So, we've heard sort of your view, Cheryl, with regards to quotas and mandatory quotas, being set and that's being effective. We do have a poll that wanted to bring up, and it was just getting your thoughts from the audience as to whether or not, and I've broken it down into two different bits, is for public companies, number one, whether you think that having externally mandated quotas from governments and regulators should be done. We're looking at
Just like
thirds,
everybody.
actually. Well, yeah, majority.
Online, we have yes saying 73% and no 27%.
Interesting. That's much higher than I expected.
Well, aligned. Well, maybe it's the only way that's going to get done.
But yeah, they're not going to do it unless they're forced to do it. Why would they?
Except for in California where they did mandate it, and then there was a constitutional
Yeah, there
challenge
was.
that ended up showing that in California that it was unconstitutional to have quotas, which is
The U.S. is a very conservative place.
Well, I will talk about the U.S. a little bit, but if we can go to the next slide, it does show, again, this is one from our report. Cheryl mentioned France, about 40%, gender quotas for both men and women. So it's required. Norway is the same. And then in France as well, this 40% quota for both genders includes private companies. But this is where it's a bit of a trigger, is with revenues or total assets of over $50 million that have 250 or more employees. Like, that's not a huge number of private companies that would be like that. And then in Norway, this also includes, this is the 40% quota, it also includes boards at state-owned enterprises, as well as senior management positions, which I think is key. Like, that's something that's very different that we haven't seen, is that they're actually making that mandatory. And then Norway also requires that women should be systematically recruited for middle management. So this is where, at the very top, this is what is happening, is that you've got these external quotas that are being required from the government, and it is making a difference. Now with Italy, they say it's the less represented gender, that's how they call it, and having representation of at least 1/3, so 33%, and that any subcommittees and banks, so banks and its subcommittees also need to have the 1/3 representation. The subcommittees having at least one person. We talk about sort of, the token of the less represented gender. So it can go either way, right? If it ever flips, it's going to end up being benefit to whoever it is. And then Belgium requiring at least 1/3 representation of each gender. Now, in
Wait
the
a minute. In a company with each subcommittee should have.
at least one person of the
If you
less
have
represented
one
gender.
woman on your board, that woman is going to be worn out being on several.
On all your
she
subcommittees.
may make a lot of money, but she's going to be worn out being on all those
Oh
subcommittees.
yeah, no, the trend that you will see globally is that you have women that are on multiple boards and they are getting tired, right? We're talking about burnout. This is exactly a part of the reason, is that there's not enough people to be able to spread it around. Definitely. And then quickly for the US, so there are no national quotas in place for women on boards there, but there are, again, a number of state measures. So Massachusetts, I can't even speak properly, excuse me, has one of the most aggressive requirements of between 40 to 50% of women board members by the end of 2023, dependent on their board size. So they're the most progressive out of all the states. And then according to Harvard Law School Forum on Corporate Governance, in 2021, women held 24% of Russell 3000 directorships. 3% were still all men. And the Russell 3000 index tracks 90% of all US stocks. So it represents the majority of public companies that's listed in the US. So one of the other things in the US is that variable investors have started holding nominating committee chairs accountable if their boards fail to disclose or lack racial and or ethnic diversity. And that through June 21, 95 nominating and or governance committee chairs received negative votes in excess of 30%, because 85% of these boards companies didn't actually disclose any board racial or ethnic diversity numbers.
But the good thing about the US, I find, is that there are a lot of institutions and organizations that will start putting pressure. And I'm sure you've all seen BlackRock. Also, the NASDAQ is starting to have requirements as well. So once you get stakeholder pressure behind you, I think that is another way to motivate real change. I liked let me see, I'm going to read the quote. So this is in 2021, the New York Department of Financial Services wrote to all CEOs of regulated banks and highlighted the importance of diversity and inclusion, and noted that higher the representation of women and people of color, the higher the likelihood of performance. And they said that companies need to pay close attention to their talent pipelines of future diverse leaders in addition to the diversity of their affiliates, and that they should make diversity of their leadership a business priority and integrate it into their corporate governance. And it goes on, and I like that powerful organizations like that are starting to make public statements about it, because that will also help to hopefully shift perspectives.
And then, just very quickly, it was kind of along the same lines, but the next polling question is now with regards to quotas being mandated for private companies. A little bit different. I don't know whether or not that changes anybody's kind of minds as to whether they think that should happen. Any thoughts? Anybody who thinks that it should be?
Yes.
Quotas
Slightly
for
less.
private companies.
There's definitely
So
less.
not non-listed companies.
Non-listed.
Non-listed
correct.
companies.
So
The majority, it's the small and medium-sized companies that really make the world go round, and they are very much. They have to follow the laws in terms of discrimination in the workplace anyway. So why not in the boardroom?
Mm-hmm.
And one way that we can do that is, for example, all regulated companies. Just to start there, all regulated, not even listed, but regulated companies within the BMA
Whether they're
would be
private
required to
or
file
listed.
their numbers. That's a very, very easy fix if people really wanted to have that happen. So
Mhm.
you can write to them if you
And
want it.
I go for parity, for 50-50.
And let's talk about that really quickly. That is something that people are sort of arguing about whether or not gender balance actually is required at the 50-50 level. We mentioned earlier France and Norway are statutory 40%. What do you think is, right, Rachel? Well, we know yours. What do you think yours as well?
Honestly, I think it has to do more with belonging and inclusivity. And I think that the data shows that you need about a third of people in the room to look or feel like you belong. And I think once you have a sense of belonging, you have a sense of confidence, and you feel more comfortable speaking out, speaking your truth. And even if other people don't agree with your thoughts, you feel like you can make those points. And so a boardroom is all about diversity of thought, right? You don't want all your directors to think the same thing and say the same thing at the same time. You want them to challenge management, to have diverse opinions, to ask questions, to have robust discussions, and then come to a decision. And once you come to that decision, all of the board members get behind it and support the company. So it's not to say that if you're a woman in the room, you always need to be right or you always need to speak, but you need to own your seat in the room.
There's a difference between, I believe it's 30%, you need a minimum of 30% for that minority, and when I say minority, gender or ethnic or race, to make a difference as opposed to the token. When I'm talking about parity, I'm saying that because of fairness, social justice, and what is right. And
I don't think anyone would disagree with you.
Okay, if we are educated, we are more educated, and we have something to say, but yet we are systematically shut out. And we need to have more than that 30% seat at the table, yes, to make a difference, but for fairness and justice. And I should have as much an equal right to be at that table as the other men that are in the room. And they do not have a right to have 7 out of 10 of them just because they're men.
Yeah. So we've just kind of ignored experience, expertise, qualifications, education, and everything else that needs to get you in the, why you're in the boardroom.
I said we are already more educated than they are.
Well, there is a lot of debate, though, as to whether or not just having a female at this point in time, regardless of their qualifications, et cetera, but having a female voice on the board itself, just on its own, is a positive start, right? There is actually, I don't know if anybody's heard this, it's a common saying that 1 is a token, so we're talking about kind of females definitely within the boards. 1 is a token, 2 is a presence, and 3 is a voice. It's also been mentioned in like a similar vein where they say 1 is invincible, 2 are a conspiracy, and 3 are mainstream. So 3 seems to be kind of like the sort of the lucky number. It is, and a lot of the boards, are kind of 6 to 7 size. So it makes sense.
Do you know the company Mothercare? Mothercare PLC is a baby company in the UK, sells baby clothes and strollers and everything. Recently went into bankruptcy, I think. Not one of their board members was a woman, and yet they were selling products about babies. Like, who is the client and the purchaser and the customer that they're selling to, and yet they didn't think that having a female in their boardroom would be helpful at all. And you see what's happened to the business. So, I mean, that speaks to your financial performance. Just common sense,
Absolutely.
really.
Yep, definitely.
The other thing,
I'm sorry, just like, I want to ask a question.
I want to point out the whole ESG movement. And I just came from, I was invited to an ESG conference at Harvard Business School 2 weeks ago. And we've gotten our teeth into the E, environment, and especially climate change. That's what the whole focus is always about. What was very interesting, though, this conference actually focused as well on the S, the social justice. And the S is very, very difficult, and that's what we're talking about here when we're talking about diversity and inclusion and women in boards. And even the BMA in August just came out with their ESG policy statement. They made in one sentence, they actually had the S. They talked about it in something like a 20-page policy. Until we can get our arms around or wrap our heads around the S part, we're really going to have a problem. That goes back to what we were saying in the very beginning. And that's the social justice, social inclusion, diversity, inclusion. I have to give Harvard credit. They had one panel, plenary panel on the S, on diversity and inclusion, and they had 3 great panelists. But then the other problem with social justice and social inclusion is the cultural part. Because when you look around the entire world, whose values are you imposing in terms of putting more women in the boardroom, putting more gay people in the boardroom, putting, there's queer, binary, non-binary, polyamorous, all of that. One of my friends, he's a general counsel of a listed company, and he said he got a request to not just state race, gender, but sexual orientation. He's like, I can't ask that question in my board. But they're real issues, and it's not, and when we're talking about women in the boardroom, when we're talking about other than white men in the boardroom, we've got to wrap our heads around that S in the ESG.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I'm conscious of time. I know that there's probably about 10 or so minutes left.
We haven't even got to the list of
Well,
things
hold
that
on.
we
This
can
is where
do.
this is where I'm getting to right now. If
Where
people
are
are
the
okay with
cards?
running like 5 or so minutes late, feel free. Otherwise, if you do need to go, then please do. We do have one last polling question, and it is, what would be your main motivation for wanting to join a board? We're asking for main. I know that there'll probably be multiple, but it is a couple of different things. And maybe just a quick raise of hands. I'll just go through the options really quickly and see what ends up being the biggest one. Money. Okay. Increased reputation or status. To make meaningful change from social side. Ooh, okay, look at that. Retirement plan. And other. Okay, well, there you are, social change. That seems to be the biggest one. I don't know, Touche, from your end.
We have money 9%, increased status and reputation 15%, to make meaningful change 66%. These are all percentages, sorry. Retirement plan 7%, and then other was 3%.
Excellent. Are you surprised by that?
Not really surprised. Given the audience, I'm not really surprised.
I am.
Well, what
I
did you think
did
it would
not
be?
join a board to make change. However, once on the board, and then I realized there was a meeting in one of those summer gatherings, and they brought everybody in from all around the world or whatever, and all of these women, the different heads or department heads or whatever from around the world came up to me. They gathered around me, and they wanted to meet me. Oh, Cheryl Packwood, you're the woman on the board. And I realized even if I'm just one voice, I'm important to a whole bunch of people that I didn't know I was, and hence I have insisted on staying. So not necessarily I didn't join to make a difference. I'm staying to make a difference.
Not just for us, but for our kids, grandchildren, etc.
Well, we know that girls and women need to see other women excelling so that they know that they can do the same thing.
Yeah.
So if you're not there, then who's going to be there?
So we have about 7 minutes.
Oh gosh.
To go through sort of one last question. Was actually, I know that ladies have quite a bit to say, and it was just about, we've heard about organizations and boards, and so now we want to just talk a little bit just with regards to yourselves, and what is it that you can do that might be able to sort of help to make progress, and it can just be small steps at a time, but something better than nothing. So I don't know who wants to start with that. We'll have to keep it succinct though.
Oh shoot.
Get your elevator speech together. 30 seconds. Ask. Don't be afraid to ask. All they can say is no. But they can say yes. So you ask for either the promotion, or once you're at the point where you want to be on a board, or you're ready to be on your board, or you're ancient enough to be on a board. It seems to be part of being old.
No thanks.
Ask. Talk to people. And figure out why you'd be good on that board. What is your skill set? And that goes into your elevator speech. That has to be really quick, sweet, and I haven't figured out what mine is yet, but do it. And mentors, it doesn't matter whether they're male or female. They will give you something different, because we are different. You were asking me when we were talking about this, do you want a male mentor? Do you want a female? And I said, no, you want both, because they're going to tell you different things, and they're going to give you different advice. And and neither is better or worse.
A male mentor will get you on a board.
Not necessarily. But yes, you're right. But a female mentor will help you stay on the board and become
100%.
better.
Yeah, and help you tell you who you are, or help you vocalize who you are.
You got some things to add to
Oh
this?
gosh.
And
Look,
we as women have to help each other. We are some of our
100%.
worst enemies, and we do each other in, and we've got to stop it.
yeah.
Stop it. Okay? Ladies, women. And I think a lot of that is because there are so few positions out there. And
Yeah.
so in many ways we're all fighting for that one position. And that's not fair, and that's why it's got to be parity. So that we're fighting, you know, okay, merit qualification. I don't buy into that whole argument because I'm sorry, white men have not been meritorious for, what is it, 500 years we've been over here? They just were. Anyway, and now that we are more meritorious, we're still not getting the positions. So just, you know.
Sarah. I have 25 things on my list. Like, I know how people who've heard me speak before know I like to like leave people with like a list.
Well, we can definitely, there's going to be some things that we
So,
can
yeah.
sort of, you know, distribute to everybody at the end of this. So this could be a part of it.
Yeah, that looks, you
Some of
typed
it.
up.
Look, I typed it up.
There you go.
She's going to send it out.
She was like, what can we do? I'm like, here's number 1, quotas. We just talked about that. Here's number 2, legislative reform. Companies Act, the Bermuda Stock Exchange listings. There is no requirement in the Bermuda Companies Act to have a Bermuda resident director. So you can have all of your directors from your international headquarters in London. Thank you. Thank you,
What
Susan.
did she
Except
say?
for DABA licenses where you have that.
2 minutes.
2 minutes? Okay, so let's say we have that requirement go back in. You need to have at least 1 resident Bermuda director, right? So you've got to pick from the local pool. And you need to have a gender and diversity policy built into the Companies Act. Right there, you've got 2 things that we've done. Reporting requirements. Any listed companies, there's only like 11 Bermuda Stock Exchange listed companies. Any regulated companies, the BMA build it into their codes of conduct. You can build it into governance charters at the board, right? The board chair should be taking responsibility for what their succession planning is. And if you made it a requirement that every director has to find a successor who's of the opposite sex, or the same sex, or females, or if every position has to have a female put forward to the... She's telling me off. I've got 1 minute. Okay. Okay, here we go. What is going to make the biggest change? If every male director took it upon themselves to mentor a female successor, that would change the needle. And I am a product of that because I have a male mentor who took me under his wing and said, I am going to put you on this board to support me. I hope that I've kind of shown that I need to be there because I have a voice in the room and I'm making a difference. But that is a responsible step that people could take. And for women, I think the biggest thing we can do is understand your values and your purpose. Because once you have your values and you're centered in your values, which I think you said at like 7 years old, right? You can align yourself with other organizations and other people who share those values. Why would you want to be in an organization, and this is your job, and your job is in the boardroom, that don't align with your values, right? And so once you've got that straight in your head, go out and you look for those companies that align with what you believe. And if your true core being is about family, you find an organization that is about family. My organization, our tagline is family forward, because my team is my family and my clients are my family. And those are the people I want to work with. Bacardi, they're all about family. So once you feel centered in yourself, go out and find those places and speak to those people who work in those organizations that meet. And I promise, when you can say that out loud, that has so much power. You go into the room with your recruiter, your board chair, and you say, why should I be in this room? Because I believe the same thing that you do. I want the same thing that you do, and I will help you achieve it because I have these skills, this education, this experience, and I'm going to help you get further than you thought you could get yourself. We have power. Anyway, that was
No,
like,
thank you. I know. You consolidate everything all at once, and I think that if there are any questions in terms of kind of finding male directors to act as mentors, and you have that kind of separate question, I think Sara would be more than willing to kind of get some questions later on after this. So I know we are going to have to wrap up, otherwise I'm going to get cut off. So I just want to thank all of you for your time and participation today in the polling sessions. I think for some of us, we may have been a little bit surprised in terms of the answers. I think I was for some things. And then obviously thanking Cheryl and Sara for their time and effort spent on this. So, and Diamond Festival, of course, thank you.
thank you. Thank you.
Are we going to ask any questions?
Now, we do have about 5 minutes available for questions, if anybody has any that they wanted to ask right now.
Just sort of an offering of hope in terms of comparative jurisdictions. So, for example, in Canada, and he's not everyone's favorite for sure, but the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, about 4 years ago was urged to have parity in the Senate, and in 2020 they did reach gender parity in the Senate. Short-lived, 2 people died, and then they have to get it back. But there is something to be said for sort of having a mission and committing to it, and not putting barriers in the way, which is something I'm going to come back to. And then the second thing, I just kind of, again, want to offer hope to Bermuda, is that, 5-8 years ago, we weren't having discussions about legislation and regulating numbers and quotas. And there's, policy processes have cycles, right? And it starts out with the education and getting people sort of on board, then to talking about, well, what did that look like in voluntary policy? Then looking at things like targets and goals, and then maybe quotas and legislative reform. And I think I would kind of be pressed to say, I think that we're sort of in the second phase of that cycle. And I'm not saying slow it down, but I'm just saying to have hope that we are actually, you can actually see, if you look back in the last 10 years, how the narrative has changed and how we are moving it along. And it just the pace has to increase. But the community has to go through those cycles. The business community has to go through those cycles. And there has been change. We were never talking about quotas. In fact, it was a dirty word in terms of race and gender equity 10 years ago. Never would happen. So you can see that change. And then the last comment, and then kind of maybe a question back out to the group, is that in the States, there's a lot of narratives around putting in false barriers for people to sit on boards. So the language that I'm reading and seeing is, we should no longer talk about capacity building for directors, training for directors, that is expensive, and in fact, no other board members in the past have had to go through. And I'm wondering, as a community of business leaders and industry professionals, it is important to have some training or some knowledge or expertise on a board, but is training that then becomes something sort of something to get to hope to be then placed on a board, is that necessary? Is that something, and I don't know. This is just more of a, let's reflect on putting in place extra requirements. You need this degree, you need that degree, you need this training and this certificate, when in fact you actually need some experience and your own professional expertise, and then you need to be in there and do the job. Just like in Canada. They didn't select unqualified women. They selected people who needed the opportunity and they could be in the position to make the changes. So it's a comment.
I love that. I think the easiest way to deal with one of those questions about the barriers is for boards to do a skills audit and a matrix before they're starting their succession planning, right? And so board assessment, which is common, and most boards, I think, are starting to do it at least annually, will do their board assessment and identify where are they maybe skills heavy, maybe where do they have their gaps, and then build their training plan for their board off of that. And so if you've got that basis, it should be helpful to recruit so that you're looking for very specific elements if you are trying to fill a gap within your board, but there's rationale for it. So, you know, if it's cybersecurity, for example, that may be one factor when you're looking for a new board member. I guess what we're saying is that's one factor, but if you're looking for gender parity, you've got to start on the basis that you've got to look for a female first and then look at what their skills that they have, rather than look for the skills, because you're going to cut out a lot of women before you even get to the numbers. So, and we're only saying it kind of to play devil's advocate.
And saying the way you're sort of putting it is, I'm hearing a presumption that the woman's not qualified, and I'm saying that we are qualified, and we are qualified from the very get-go. And so the concept of any barrier to us entering a board is a red herring, and always has been a red herring. And those weren't the qualifications that have historically been required for men, and in particular white men, to sit on boards. Yeah. I'm just being a little bit more,
Right.
yeah. And boards will also train you while you're
That's
on
part
the
of it.
board. I mean, there's constant training. We're always
Always
getting
training.
It's just, you know, and if you don't get you don't read the email, they call you.
What do you think about?
Actually, we do need to wrap up,
Okay.
unfortunately.
One more question?
I don't know, we actually don't have the time for it, but maybe
that's
kind of
okay.
afterwards.
Okay.
We're going to well, some of us will be able to hang around for a little while. So if you do have any other questions, you can bring it up then. Thank you. I'm
Thank
sorry
you
for
so
the
much.
time.
Thank you.